This week on the show, we have Google Summer of Code 2018 projects announced. We give you a tutorial on FreeBSD jails with iocage. A new code of conduct for FreeBSD is out. We cover a little bit of Libhijack, and we show you fancy monitoring for your OpenSMTPD in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 234, Code and Community, recorded on the 21st of February 2018. Hi, I'm your host, Benedict Heuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we have a great show prepared for you this week, so we should get right into our headlines. With Google Summer of Code 2018, projects have been announced.
Yes, so these are the organizations like the FreeBSD project and the NetBSD project and FOSS Asia that will be allowed to do projects as part of Google Summer of Code. But the actual projects haven't, the projects the students will do have not been selected yet. You still have time to apply.
Just the mentoring organizations that have been...
Yes, the organizations that will participate have been selected. So whether you want to work on FreeBSD or FFmpeg, you can check out the list on Google's site. We have a link in the show notes. But as in many previous years, FreeBSD and NetBSD are participating, and we are looking for both students to actually participate in projects, mentors to help, but also just ideas about projects. Selecting a project for Google Summer of Code is slightly difficult in that it needs to be big enough that it's worth Google actually paying someone to do it, but small enough that a student who is maybe not that familiar with BSD can complete it in the 10 to 12 weeks of time that they have over the summer.
Yeah, together with their mentors, providing guidance and help in the beginning. So
there's a chat room for FreeBSD, the FreeBSD-SoC on EFNet, where there are a bunch of FreeBSD developers and mentors hanging out, answering questions. Also past GSoC students and others that are wishing to apply this year. Over on the FreeBSD page, there's information about how Summer of Code works and what the advantages are, and some examples, and a link to where you can see the Google Summer of Code ideas page, where they have some ideas about projects that you might be interested in doing. There's a number about extending the Zen support in FreeBSD. And this one's actually porting the bus DMA handler from OpenBSD to FreeBSD. Interesting one. Or support for booting ZenDOM 0 from EFI. If you want to get involved in the bootloader, it's a great way to get into the kernel. Or if you're interested in fuzz testing with things like Trinity or Triforce or Syscolor, or if you want to do formal verification of Beehive's instruction emulation, or work on graphics, or PowerPC, ARM, MIPS, or any other non-x86 architecture bring-up you want to work on, lots of other project ideas on here, and also looking for any ideas other people have on, these medium-sized projects that make sense for Google Summer of Code.
Mm-hmm. And I like that many of the former Google Summer of Code people who are now, like from years ago, are now becoming or have become project members in the meantime and committers, and are now themselves mentoring other people because they know the process, and that's a nice continuation of the work.
Yes, it's very interesting to see how many FreeBSD people originally got into FreeBSD via Google Summer of Code, and to see them getting back into Summer of Code from the mentor side to continue that process.
Yeah, you don't have to just limit yourself to the summer project. If you like the project and the technical challenges there, then by all means, this could be continued afterwards.
Indeed. So the schedule, you can start applying for projects between March 12th and 27th. That's when you submit to Google, I want to work on this project with FreeBSD or NetBSD or what other open source project. And then by April 23rd, the open source projects will decide which projects they're going to accept and pair you up with a mentor. Then there's some community bonding time where you get to caught up to speed and understand what FreeBSD is and how to get started with it or whatever. And then from the 14th of May to the 22nd of August, you actually work on the project and provide weekly status updates and get evaluated, I think, 3 times throughout the semester or the summer. There's also some other interesting projects on the list here from NetBSD, including they want a EFI bootloader for ARM, using libfuzzer on base tools to find bugs, refactoring the Alt-Q quality of service implementation and integrating it with NPF, the new NetBSD firewall, a test suite for libcurses to make sure their interface is good, and approving their package-in build system. And they have a whole other list of projects over on their wiki as well.
Mm-hmm. And also there, these projects are just suggestions. If you, as a student, come up with your own project and that fits with NetBSD's goals, then they take suggestions for other suitable projects, and you can contact them on IRC. That's irc.freenode and the NetBSD, NetBSD-code, or package source channels. And also, we also included Haiku here because it's fairly BSD-ish in
BSD adjacent, we like to say.
Yeah, it's not too far, and so we included that here as well. So there's the link of their acceptance or what their kind of project list might be, and students can apply for a Haiku idea on their Haiku-OS community page, and there you can find the project ideas that they have currently come up, or you can also reach out to them on IRC. That's irc.freenode.org in the Haiku channel. And again, this is something you don't do for free. If you finish your project, you can get the money from Google, which is something to compensate you a little bit for the work you're doing. But most people just stay with the projects and take the money, of course, but they like it so much because it's a good way of introducing yourself into a project in their community and stick on with the project or continue with the work even after Google Summer of Code is long over. So thanks for the people who organize these in the project and collect the ideas and manage all this. And to the students, success with your projects, and we hope to cover a couple of these in the future episode.
I would really like to get some interviews with GSoC students as well.
Yeah, former or current, like the whole. It would be very interesting to hear how the whole process went, how they picked the project, and what kind of problems they had with their implementations and things like that.
Yeah, should reach out to my student from last year and see if we could do one, even just to help encourage people to do it this year.
Yeah.
So next up, we have a tutorial on managing FreeBSD jails with iocage. It starts, FreeBSD jails allow users to run multiple isolated instances of FreeBSD on a single server. iocage simplifies the management of FreeBSD jails, and by following this tutorial, the jails will be configured to bind to an IP address on the jail's host's internal network, and the host OS will pass traffic from the external network to the jail, which is a popular way to do it when you don't have multiple external IP addresses.
Yeah, so you take the loopback interface and use that?
Yes, or well, they used an internal network here so that...
Or an internal?
If you actually... Well, yeah, they did it with loopback interfaces, so but not loopback addresses. Slightly weird, but normal. Okay, so network setup. You set up the internal network, enable the PF packet filter, and configure PF to pass the internet traffic to and from the jails. So you can see they set up their cloned interfaces to include the LO1 interface, which is basically a second copy of the loopback adapter, and gave it an IP address and enabled the PF firewall. In their firewall, they configured their external network interface and their jail interface and network, and configured it so that they will NAT all the traffic out onto the internet.
And the other way around, from the internet into the respective jails.
Yes, they forward incoming connections on port 80 to one of the jails. And then they set up ZFS and make that work.
And that seems pretty straightforward, other than using a file for the pool. So they
yes, they use just a file for the pool. I imagine that's just as an example. In general, you would normally use the pool that the host OS is installed on, but and then they show installing iocage. Pretty straightforward. And then once you have iocage, you just activate the thing by giving it the name of the pool, have it fetch the images you want, create a new jail, tell it you want FreeBSD 11.1. So create a new jail called www with the IP address, and then start the jail and connect to the console. Once you're inside the jail, you can just install Apache, set it to start at boot, and run it. And it's pretty straightforward. If you have multiple jails, you can just run the create command again, start it and console into it, and it's all set. And then you could use something like Nginx to actually do routing. So while you can use PF to say, this port goes to that jail and this port goes to this other jail, if you want to host multiple websites in different jails, you can have one jail that runs Nginx or probably the OpenBSD HTTPD or some other light one that will look at the host name that the person is requesting and proxy the request to the right jail. So you can actually run multiple different apps on port 80.
Yeah, this is cool. And iocage is pretty straightforward enough. It's just a replacement for the jail command, pretty much, and gives you some functionality around managing the jails and adding IP addresses and things like that. So that makes it a little bit more easy.
And having an automatic set of prepackaged, making it easy to install multiple versions of FreeBSD and run them in jails.
Yeah.
But with the PF example and everything, it's a pretty good tutorial to get you started.
Mm-hmm. And the main developer of iocage is employed by our first sponsor of this week, IX Systems, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And go to ixsystems.com/BSD Now to download your server buying guide for open source, where they write up questions that you should ask your other hardware vendors. And soon you will find that IX Systems is the right vendor for just your problem, because they ask you specific questions about the server you're going to run with that open source solution that you're trying to start up. And IX Systems can build you exactly the system that will run this solution the best, whether it's requiring much hardware or much, hardware in the sense of how many disks does it need, or does it need more CPU, or does it more require memory in this particular case. So they will build the right system exactly for that purpose.
Yeah, so basically, if you're not already using IX for getting your hardware, try actually comparing them to who you're currently using, and you'll realize you should switch. It's kind of hard to explain just how different it is than dealing with the regular hardware vendor, because every system is built specifically for you, but they still manage to do it quickly and reliably.
Yeah, it's probably
they just
because
have more experience at this than most other people, because they've been doing it since probably before you were.
Yeah, and I mean, you once you have this kind of customer support, you don't want to go lower than that. It's just you kind of expect this IX Systems behavior from everyone else, and that makes you stick with IX Systems. So they have something on their blog, SNIA, which is the Storage Network Infrastructure Association, and that's a conference where you would typically find IX Systems. So they have a report from the Persistent Memory Summit 2018.
Yes, so persistent memory is this kind of emerging technology where the memory or RAM in your system can actually maintain data even when it goes through a reboot or is powered off. So they sent their technical marketing engineer to attend the one-day event and brought people from all sides of the market together. And they say, with emerging technologies like NVDIMMs and the fact that support for those is growing, and you're basically soon going to have some or all of the DIMMs in your motherboard actually be able to retain data even through a power failure. Or just, it's completely non-volatile. So it's not just about having a battery to survive till the power comes back on or something, but just the data is persistent when it's written. With that, it becomes easier to believe in a vision where applications no longer worry about storage. Right. So instead of having memory and then separately you have slower storage, if all memory is persistent, then you write applications in a very different way because you don't have to worry about saving out to a file. Just everything that's in memory is going to be there even if the machine restarts. Raises really interesting questions about how you have to modify the application to deal with the fact that it can pick up its existing state when it starts.
Yeah. Applications like the FreeNAS or TrueOS that they're doing, server or desktop. So if you're ahead of that and can try out these technologies early on as a vendor, then you can pretty much see where this is going and try to engineer your solution towards that so you can provide your customers with a nice experience around these new technologies. Yeah, so check out ixsystems.com and tell them we sent you. Okay, our next story is the new FreeBSD Code of Conduct. So FreeBSD has a code of conduct, and we had one a couple of years for a couple of years now, and so we replaced this one with a newer one, which was released just last week, and so we like to cover a little bit what the code is all about or what it contains currently. So it starts.
The FreeBSD project is inclusive. We want the FreeBSD project to be a venue where people from all backgrounds can work together to make the best possible operating system, being built by a strong community. These values extend beyond just development to all aspects of the projects. All those given recognition as members of the FreeBSD project in whatever form are seen as ambassadors to the project. Diversity is a huge strength and is critical to the long-term success of the project. To that end, we have a few ground rules that we ask people to adhere to. This code applies equally to everyone representing the FreeBSD project in any way, from the newest member to committers to the core team itself. These rules are intended to ensure a safe, harassment-free environment for all and to ensure that everyone feels welcome, both working within and interacting with the project.
Yeah, this is hopefully something that everyone can get behind.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, it goes on with, this document is not an exhaustive list of things that you should not do, rather consider it as a guide to make it easier to enrich us all and the technical communities in which we participate. So this code of conduct applies to all spaces used by the FreeBSD project, including our mailing lists, IRC channels, and social media, both online and off. Anyone who is found to violate this code of conduct may be sanctioned or expelled from FreeBSD project controlled spaces at the discretion of the FreeBSD Code of Conduct Committee. So some FreeBSD project spaces may have additional rules in place which will be made clearly available to participants. Participants are responsible for knowing and abiding by these rules, and harassment includes but is not limited to the list that they have provided here. So should I read all of these, which is not totally exhaustive?
Reading the giant list, it's a long list.
Yeah. And again, this is not, don't do this, what's listed here.
Yeah,
it's simple as that.
Extending the original concept of the old committer's big list of rules of, don't be a dick. It's like, in case you need it, here's a list of things that clearly make you a dick. And so It's there if you require that. More importantly, if you believe someone is violating the code of conduct or feel unsafe, we ask that you report it to the FreeBSD Code of Conduct Committee by emailing conduct@freebsd.org. All reports will be kept confidential whenever possible. We strive to protect the identity and safety of people who report. In some cases, we may need to make a public statement in some form, in which case we will use the minimum of detail and identifying information necessary to protect our community. And it has some basics on what you need to provide when you send a report and how it will be dealt with.
Yeah, there's also an appeals section and a little glossary for people who might not be familiar with some of the terms being used in the code of conduct.
And we have an interview coming up in a minute here where we'll kind of explain a little bit more detail in case you need it.
So we have an interview this week with Benno Rice, member of the FreeBSD project, member of the core team, longer in the FreeBSD project than Alan and I were. So, and we had him on the show already. So welcome back to the show. And first question, we try to connect the two episodes here together. Can you tell us a little bit about why you are here today?
Well, I'm here because we being core, launched the new FreeBSD Code of Conduct last week. And as these things tend to do, they're in a bit of a reaction. We've had some reactions. We've had some nice, some supportive stuff, but we've also had some negative stuff. And so I figured talking about why codes of conduct are a good thing is probably, worth doing.
Yeah, seems like a good idea.
So I guess to frame the discussion, the first thing is, what was the objectives of the new code of conduct?
So the first code of conduct was a bit of a knee-jerk. It came in the wake of some nastiness that happened around Gamergate, and there were a few problems with it. One of them being there's a push in some codes of conduct to try and say, as well as don't offend people, they also try and say don't get offended. And one of the main objectives of this one was to resolutely point out that it's not your job not to get offended. It's your job to do your best not to offend people. And then building on top of that, you've then got to cover for the fact that some offence is not intended. And so you've really got to deal with the fact that offence is subjective. And we acknowledge that that's the case, but the way that we deal with that is by making it purely report-driven. Instead of saying that we ban this behaviour, we say this behaviour is something that some people may not appreciate, and so they can report that to us. And if we feel that that's something that needs action taken, we can take action on it.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah. So how might the code of conduct benefit the FreeBSD project? I guess that didn't get through the whole discussion.
Well, it makes it a safer space. And, some people like to mock the idea of a safe space, but most of the people mocking the idea of safe spaces are the people who don't actually need them. FreeBSD as a whole is very male, very, has a very large amount of white male people, and it doesn't have a lot of female participants, doesn't have a lot of participants of colour, a whole bunch of things like that. And trying to diversify the groups of people who feel comfortable in the project, I think, is a great goal to strive for. And we can do that without, any of the negatives that people like to ascribe to that. We're not going to bring in people who don't know what they're doing, but it means that people who do know what they're doing or could be taught could feel more comfortable in joining us in the project.
Yep. So can you give us some insight into the process that went into developing the new code of conduct?
So after the first one copped some flack, there was a working group started by the previous core team that worked with some outside consultants and sort of covered a bunch of the the construction of the working group sort of reflected some of the diversity within the project itself. And there was a lot of discussion within that group. I think we fairly early on started with the geek feminism anti-harassment policy as a base and then worked from there. And over the course of a while, it developed into the one that we have now. And there was a lot of back and forth. There was a lot of competing viewpoints as to how it should work and how it should look. But I think that through that, we've come to a better structure than we otherwise would have had. And then following on from that, there were some discussions within the core team about how the process was going to work, how we appoint the review team and things like that, which has led to the rest of the structure around it. But I think the result of it has been a really good and positive thing.
And it shows how long people have been working on that and how much work went into that whole thing.
Yeah, can you give us a sense of the timeline?
I don't remember exactly when the working group was first put together. Actually, I don't have any clear details on the timeline because I haven't got that in front of me. But it was very protracted, and there were some areas where, and this is precisely my fault in a lot of cases, that things kind of got left by the wayside due to real life getting in the way of me progressing it. But there was a lot of, I think the discussion around the code of conduct itself took most of a year, I think. And then the actual process of getting it published and the processes locked into place and announced probably took another year, basically of on and off effort. The one thing it certainly didn't do was derail any development work on FreeBSD itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we piled it all on you so the rest of us could keep working.
Yes. And my job was in management at the time, so
So now that the dust has settled a little bit, so what do you think are the three biggest misunderstandings about this current code of conduct?
Well, I think the biggest one is the notion that it actually bans anything. It really doesn't. What it does is it says that certain behaviors are unacceptable and that these, if someone interprets them to be unacceptable, then they can report it and we will deal with that. I think that's the biggest one. I mean, you've got some people saying that we've banned hugs, and frankly, those people are, well, I suppose the nicest way of putting it is that they're creatively reading the document. There are other nasty things I could say, but I won't. Second one, I think there's an interpretation that because we base it on the geek feminism one, that we believe everything that geek feminism believes. I mean, there are a bunch of people who don't like them. I think that's because the geek feminist people are, as they say, feminists, and there are some people who don't like feminists. I think just because we're using their stuff as a base doesn't mean we agree with everything they've ever said. It just means that we thought that was a good place to start. And the third one is, I think, that we've given into the social justice warrior PC feminazis, because I don't think that's really true.
Yeah. Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the actual mechanics of how the code of conduct will actually work?
So the way the code of conduct works is that we have stated that there are behaviors that we do not tolerate abusive, offensive, and harmful behavior. If you witness or experience any behavior that you think is inappropriate, you can report it to the Code of Conduct Review Team, which is conduct@freebsd.org, and they will investigate it and formulate a response. And there's plenty of leeway in how they do that. So if it turns out that it was just a simple misunderstanding, then they can just say, look, this person felt that you attacked them based on this, please don't do that again. If it's repeat offences, then they can escalate it. The top level sort of responses that could come out would be asking core to sanction someone who is a project member. And that's another part. This really only applies to FreeBSD project participants and FreeBSD controlled spaces. So if someone does something to you on Twitter and they're not a FreeBSD person, there's not much we can do about that. If they are a FreeBSD person and they're doing the wrong thing on Twitter, then we might be able to respond to that, but we're going to respond in proportion with what they did. So just looping back in, if you see or experience anything from a FreeBSD project member or in a FreeBSD-controlled space that you feel is inappropriate, then you can report it, we will investigate it, and we will respond.
Yeah, so you already...
I think the beginning of the documents clearly states that, if you're a member of the FreeBSD project, right, if you have an @freebsd.org email address, you're an ambassador for the project everywhere, and you should act like it.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly. And also that if people are in real physical danger, they should, contact the local law enforcement and other mechanisms that are there.
But when we are not able to arrest people.
Yeah. That's not in nowhere in any of the code of conducts we released. Yeah. And that's also not our job. So how will the code of conduct committee operate when it's presented with a case? The committee itself is very new, and I think it's going to take one or two cases to really formulate the actual process by which we do it. But the plan is that all reports will get a very fast acknowledgement that the report has been received, and then we'll go into an information gathering phase where we try and ascertain what exactly happened, who thought what about what was going on, all that kind of things. Then formulating a response, which will, in the case of simple communication, just be probably an email from the conduct team saying, this is what's happening, and please don't do this again, or please be aware that this might be interpreted in ways that you don't expect, or things like that. In the case of the more egregious stuff, which I hope happens very rarely, if at all, then we'll involve core in the process and deal with that in that way.
And I guess the other part of the question was about the makeup of the committee and how it will...
Oh, yeah.
New people will be added, or how that will work?
At the moment, there are 5 people on the team. I don't think that number has to stay the same. If we end up having to deal with lots of reports, which I hope we don't, then we can add more people. The current makeup of the team is designed to be as diverse as I could make it, while also bringing in some new faces that weren't on the working group. So we've got a couple of people who are on the working group. We've got some other people, and I've tried to get a variety of backgrounds on there so that we're seeing things with as many contexts as we can.
Right.
As if people ever leave the group or step down, then we'll obviously add more people to bring it back up. I think, again, this is one of those things where the core team, as the people responsible for appointing this body, are going to sort of work out the best way to approach it as we go.
Yeah, and that's what I like in many of these teams that or pretty much all of the teams that we have in FreeBSD, that people are never set in stone forever on these teams, so people can come and go, and there's cycling through if people burned out or other reasons, and that's also keeping the process fresh and alive enough for people to contribute to those.
Right, and I guess, like you mentioned, the Code of Conduct review team doesn't have much in the way of authority. They just make recommendations to the core team?
For any kind of sanction, yes. The conduct review team would not be able to kick someone out of the project. If they felt that was appropriate, they would have to make a case to core. And also, if someone feels that the conduct team has acted inappropriately themselves, they can appeal the conduct team's decision to core if they want to.
Yeah, or members of core could also misbehave. It's
it's one of the things that you disappointingly have to take into account is what if there's a report against a member of the conduct team or of the core team, which is why they're separate bodies, so that one can, if needed, review the other. But yeah, we're hoping that it doesn't come to that. but you have to accept that it is a possibility.
Yeah. Okay, so we heard about the conduct committee team members receiving some kind of training. Can you talk a bit about that and what that involves?
This hasn't happened yet. The intent is for both the conduct team and I believe the core team to receive training on how to actually implement the code of conduct, how to handle the enforcement side of it. This is still being sorted out, and I need to get back in touch with the FreeBSD Foundation to work out the specifics.
Yeah, so this is not just we post this document somewhere and then leave it there. It's also, keeping the members of the committees or of core fresh in their approaches, and that we can live this document to apply it properly.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so on to more interesting topics. What else have you been working on in FreeBSD land recently?
Well, I recently changed jobs. I was working for Isilon, part of Dell EMC, on their stuff. That was a lot of fun. It was my first FreeBSD day job, and given how hard it is to find any kind of FreeBSD work in Australia, getting full-time employment on that was a lot of fun. So much so that I ended up moving to Seattle. I'm moving back. I'm now working for IOCage Systems. And at the moment, I'm trying to put together a hybrid boot system for FreeBSD, sort of the x86 derivative, so that you can actually have a single image that boots as both a CD image and a USB memory stick.
Ooh, yes, I've been waiting for that. And if ISO Linux does it, it can't be that bad, but I don't want to have to use that tool.
This is deriving from work that's around FreeNAS. FreeNAS has historically used Grub, but is moving back to the FreeBSD boot code, thankfully. But the one place where we can't do that at the moment is on the installer images, because Grub can do the hybrid boot thing, whereas FreeBSD boot code can't. And so digging through the actual way that it does that, I've sort of reverse engineered how it does it, and I'm just trying to re-implement it in our boot code.
Cool. Yeah, so you mentioned that you're moving back to Australia. Can we expect a BSD conference happening there in the not-too-distant future once you settle in?
Well, I think I'd need to find a few more people who are willing to help organize it. I mean, the kind of the premier sort of large open source conference in Australia is LinuxConf AU, although it's been very much not purely Linux for a very long time. That's actually running in Christchurch in New Zealand next year, and so I'm thinking of pitching a BSD mini-conf to them as that, but maybe Andrew Turner can go back to New Zealand and help me set up a bigger one.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, that sounds like fun. Was there anything else you wanted to talk to us about?
No, I think that's all I've got.
Okay.
Okay.
You have something
what else did you want me to talk about, Alan?
I don't know. What other ideas do you have? Things you'd like to see work done, maybe in FreeBSD?
Well, I have a laundry list.
Well, yes.
And not nearly enough time.
The one I was just thinking of was our idea to come up with a laundry list of talks we would like to see at a BSD conference, and then trying to match those up with people, or just as suggestions for people.
Okay, right.
Remember when you and I came up with that idea?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the list of talks was.
We didn't have a list yet. The project was to come up with a list.
Okay, right. Well, I would like to see discussions on service management as an actual concept, as opposed to just Bootstrap.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see... Actually, here's one I'd love to see, and I do actually need to go talk to some people about this. I want to see a common appliance infrastructure project built on top of FreeBSD. FreeBSD gets a lot of use as an appliance. You can see that in FreeNAS, TrueNAS stuff that I work on now, but also in pfSense and various other things. I reckon it would be, if we had a common set of framework code that allowed you to do updates, like system updates, package updates, manage configuration, all that kind of stuff. And then you could retrofit fit that into, say, FreeNAS and pfSense and everything else, then that just really lowers the bar for anyone else who wants to try and build that kind of appliance-level code on FreeBSD. That's also the kind of thing that could be done iteratively. I think the system image update framework, I think, would be a huge boon to that kind of stuff, because it allows you to then hopefully do that without necessarily running into some of the security issues that things like IoT devices are constantly slamming their legs into.
Yes, I will share a link with you offline for the document I've been working on for the last while for the FreeBSD Appliance Framework Toolkit.
You need a better acronym.
Yes. It doesn't have an acronym yet. It's just a doc with a bunch of ideas I've had about having a common framework for building your own updaters so that you don't do it wrong, and a bunch of other things that every appliance has to do, and why should everybody redo it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where everyone seems to write their own, so everyone ends up with unique problems, but they're always similar problems to the ones that everyone else has had, just, worded slightly differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, because I'm writing it, it's got a bit of a ZFS bent to it, but with features like the full pool rollback, the checkpoints, it means you can completely undo a failed upgrade. Delphix invented this feature for ZFS, for their ZFS appliance, and shared it with everybody. We just have to implement it.
Mm.
Yes, unfortunately, though, Alan, we are going to have to implement this for UFS as well as ZFS.
I understand. It won't be as good, but...
All right. Are we going to see you at any of the future BSD conferences? BSD Can, maybe?
I won't be at BSD Con. I should be at BSD Can.
Okay. That'll be a long trip by then, or is that before you leave?
No, that's before I leave. I'm moving back sort of early July.
So we hope you liked our interview with Benno, and time for our news roundup this week with Libhijack in proof of concept mode. So this one is over at soldierx.com. And it starts off with hijacking your FreeBSD, so that sounds interesting. It begins with, in the land of red devils, known as beasties, exists a system devoid of meaningful exploit mitigations. As we explore this vast land of opportunity, we will need our elfish friends practicing or p-tracing their very moves in order to hijack them. So it's already kind of a flowery language here, but...
laying on the euphemisms and puns pretty thick, yes.
But yeah, let's continue. Since unprivileged process debugging is enabled by default in FreeBSD, we can abuse ptrace to create anonymous memory mappings, inject code into them, and override PLD/GOT entries. We will revive a tool called Libhijack to make our nefarious activities of hijacking ELFs via ptrace relatively easy. We cut down the whole article a little bit, so it's the most important things to get you interested.
You can go read the whole thing if this is the type of thing that interests you.
Yeah. So nothing presented here is technically new. However, this type of work has not been documented in this much detail, tying it all into one cohesive work. So in FRAC 56, Silvio Cesare taught us ELF research enthusiasts how to hook the PLT GOT. The FRAC 59 article on runtime process infection briefly introduces the concept of injecting shared objects by injecting shellcode via ptrace that calls DLOpen. No other piece of research, however, has discovered the joys of forcing the application to create anonymous memory mappings in which to inject code. This is only part of a series of planned articles that will follow on Libhijack's development, and the end goal is to be able to anonymously inject shared objects. The Libhijack project is maintained by the SoldierX community. So here's a section on previous research. All previous work injects code into the stack, the heap, or existing executable code. All three methods create issues of today's systems. On AMD 64 and ARM 64, the two architectures Libhijack cares about, the stack is non-executable by default. And JE-malloc, the heap implementation of FreeBSD, creates non-executable mappings. Obviously, overwriting existing executable code destroys a part of the executable image. So the road to ELF is that FreeBSD provides a nifty API for inspecting the entire virtual memory space of an application. The results returned from the API tells us the protected flags like readable, writable, or executable of each mapping. And if FreeBSD provides such a rich API, why would you need to parse the ELF headers? So in PLG GOT hijacking, it requires parsing the ELF headers. One would not be able to find that without iterating through the process headers to find the dynamic headers, eventually ending up with DT underscore PLG GOT. So these are entries in that header. With FreeBSD's libprox.that API, we don't have a need for parsing the ELF headers until we get to the PLG stage. By doing so exactly or early makes it easier for the attacker using Libhijack. And the future of Libhijack, after a couple of code examples, you can see how it's implemented and how it can be used. Writing devious code in assembly is cumbersome. Assembly doesn't scale well to multiple architectures. Instead, we would like to write our devious code in C, compiling to a shared object that gets injected anonymously. This requires writing on a remote RTLD within Libhijack and is in progress. Writing a remote RTLD will take a while, as doing so is not an easy task. In addition, creation of a general-purpose helper library that gets injected would be helpful. It could aid in PLG GOT redirection attacks, possibly storing the address of functions we've previously hijacked. This work is dependent on the remote RTLD. Libhijack itself currently lacks documentation. Once the API and ABI stabilize, formal documentation will be written. And the conclusion of the whole article is that using Libhijack, we can easily create anonymous memory mappings, inject into them arbitrary code, and hijack the PLD GOD on FreeBSD. On hardened BSD, a hardened derivative of FreeBSD, Libhijack is fully mitigated through the PAX no exec. We've demonstrated that wrapper-style capsicum is ineffective on FreeBSD. Through the use of Libhijack, we emulate a control flow hijack in which the application is forced to call sandbox_open and FDL open on the resulting file descriptor. Further work to support anonymous injection of full shared objects along with their dependencies will be supported in the future. Imagine injecting libpcap into Apache to sniff traffic whenever a get/pcap is sent. And in order to prevent abuse of ptrace, FreeBSD should set the security.bsd.unprivileged_proc_debug sysctl to 0 by default. And in order to prevent process manipulation, FreeBSD should implement PAX no exec. And for people interested in the Libhijack library, they can find that on SoldierX's GitHub page.
Yep. If that was all a bit over your head, like it was a bit for me, maybe the next subject will be a little more fun, which is an introduction to the POSIX shell. So this is plain SH. So what the heck is the POSIX shell anyway? Well, the POSIX shell, or Portable Operating System Interface shell, is the standard Unix shell. Standard meaning it has formally defined and shipped in a published standard. This makes shell scripts written for it portable, something no other shell can lay claim to. The POSIX shell is basically a formalized version of the venerable Bourne shell, and on your system, it normally lives in bin sh. Unless you're part of the unlucky masses, in which case that's just a symlink to bash.
Yep.
So why should you use the POSIX shell? The born again shell, or bash, is not standardized. Its grammar, features, and behavior aren't formally written up anywhere, and only one implementation of bash exists. Without a standard, bash is defined by its implementation. Whereas the POSIX shell, on the other hand, has many competing implementations on many different operating systems, all of which are compatible with each other because they are all designed to the same standard that was written first. Any shells that utilize features specific to bash are not portable. If you try to run them on FreeBSD, it's not going to work unless you install bash. This means that you cannot take them to any other systems. Many Linux-based systems do not use bash or GNU core utils. Outside of Linux, pretty much everyone but Herd does not ship the GNU tools, including bash. On any of these systems, scripts using bashisms or features specific to bash just won't work. This is bad if your users wish to utilize your software anywhere other than a Linux that uses Bash. If your build tools utilize Bashisms, your software will not compile on anything but Linux. If you ship runtime scripts that use Bashisms, your software will not start on anything but Linux. The case for sticking to POSIX shell is shipping software is compelling, but I argue that you could or should stick to POSIX shell for your personal scripts too. You might not care now, but when you feel like flirting with a different Unix operating system, you'll thank me that your scripts just work. One place where POSIX shells do not shine is for interactive use, a place where I think Bash isn't very good either. Any shell you want to use for your day-to-day command line work is okay with the author. They apparently use Fish. I mostly use TCSH or ZSH. Use whatever you like interactively. But if you're writing a shell script, POSIX SH. No.
There's only one shell.
Yes.
In this case.
So then it gets to, how do I use POSIX shell? Well, it's pretty standard. At the top of your shell script, put the shebang line for bin sh. You don't have to worry about using env here, like you might have been trained to do with Bash. Bin sh is the standard location of the POSIX shell, and any standard conforming system will either put it there or make your scripts work anyway. The next step is to avoid Bashisms. There are many, but here are a few that might trip you up. On conditions, Bash uses 2 sets of square brackets. It's only supposed to be 1. Also, there are no arrays in POSIX shell. And local variables don't work. You need to use a subshell. The easiest way to learn about POSIX shell is to read the standard. It's not too dry and shorter than you might think. And then it talks a bit about using standard core utils. The last step to writing portable scripts is to use portable tools. Your system may have GNU core utils installed, which provide tools like grep and cut. Unfortunately, GNU has extended these tools with its own non-portable flags and tools. It's important that you avoid these. One dead giveaway of a non-portable flag is long flags. For example, grep-file instead of grep-f. The POSIX standard only defines the getOp function, not the proprietary GNU getOp long. As a result, no long flags are standardized. You might worry that this will make your script difficult to understand, but I think that on a whole, it will not. Shell scripts are already pretty alien and require some knowledge of and understanding. So is knowledge of what the magic word grep means much different than the knowledge of what the -e means? So I also like the short flags that allow you to be more concise command lines. Honestly, I kind of prefer the long ones, but for portability, it makes more sense to do the short ones. A good reference for learning about standardized commands is, once again, the standard. From this page, search for the command you want or navigate through the shell utilities list, and they have man pages. You can also find POSIX man pages installed on your system with the P postfix, such as man1p. Note, at the time of writing, the POSIX man pages do not use dashes. If your locale is UTF-8, which makes searching for flags with a slash in it difficult, you can force the collation to POSIX, and then you'll get what you expect. But yes, one that really catches people up is differences in tools like, say, awk. If you're writing a script on Linux and you end up using a GNUism of awk, and then you try to run the script on FreeBSD and the awk's like, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should kind of want to stick to the POSIX standard because it's the lowest common denominator supported by every operating system.
Yeah, sometimes what my students trip over is the for loop is more like a for each loop, and in the bash there's actually a for loop that's more like the for I equals 0, less than 10, increment I by 1.
Right.
Yeah, but they quickly discover that the output is different than from what they expect. So they can build the same thing with SEQ and bin.sh.
Yep. Well, SEQ is not a POSIX tool.
Right, but it's it's an external tool that's readily available in most systems.
It wasn't on FreeBSD until 9 or so.
Wasn't it? Huh.
No. We had to use Jot.
Oh, right, Jot. That's what I wanted to. Yeah.
Yes.
There you can also say increment this by 2 or any other. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. Then I mixed those two up. Yeah.
Yep. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Head over to DigitalOcean.com and check it out. When you sign up, if you use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, all one word, you'll get a $10 credit added to your account when you pay them. So this will allow you to try out one of their VMs for free. You can start with the smallest one, which is as cheap as $5 a month, in which case the $10 credit would give you 2 months free after the first month. Or you can go with the $10 droplet, which gives you twice as much memory and twice as much storage and twice as much bandwidth. Or you might decide you need more CPUs or more RAM or more disk. They have all the combinations.
Yeah, that's why the cloud solutions they offer, or generally cloud, is interesting, because if you see that your machine is not taking the workload too well, then you can just size it up or spin up another one to load balance the two, and that's pretty easy in DigitalOcean's cloud. Mm-hmm. So these little VMs, they call droplets, they have you can install basic operating systems like FreeBSD on them, or you can also say, please install me a whole software stack on it, like a WordPress blog or some other a database, for example. That's already then been set up once you start your Ocean, your little DigitalOcean droplet, and once you log in, the programs are already installed. You just have to do the basic configuration, and then you can run your weblog in a matter of minutes.
Yeah. They also have the flexible droplets, which is the new $15 size. It's kind of in between the 10 and 20. And you can choose whether you want more CPUs, more RAM, more, whichever those fits better for what you're doing, right? Do you need more CPU power and less RAM, or more RAM and less CPU, or a little bit of both? They offer all three for $15 a month, or just 2.2 cents an hour. The other nice thing about DigitalOcean is every droplet you rent is always hourly. You only pay for the hours you use it. The monthly price is just a cap. It's, February is the shortest month, but it means that even in the longer months, you're not going to pay $15.75 just because the month has 31 days instead of 30 days or whatever. It's very nice. But, it's already late in the month. It means if you sign up now and use the droplet, you won't pay for the whole month, only for the part of the month you used.
Yeah. So
when you're done, just delete the droplet and no more cost.
Yeah, once it's gone, then also the billing stops.
Yep.
All right. Going back to our stories here, we have a FreeBSD story by Landon Fuller about his work on the Broadcom Wi-Fi improvements he's been working on for a while now.
Yes, very excited for this.
Mm-hmm. So it begins with that he, as an introduction, has been working on this since 2015, and he's been tasked with improving the FreeBSD support for Broadcom Wi-Fi devices and system on chips, including authoring the BHND driver, or family driver, which includes a couple of cards or network adapters, which provides a unified bus and driver programming interface for these devices. So that was first committed in early 2016. The BHND allowed us to quickly bring up FreeBSD or MIPS, FreeBSD and MIPS on Broadcom system on chips, but it has taken much longer to implement the full set of features required to support modern Broadcom softMac Wi-Fi hardware. And thanks to the generosity of the FreeBSD Foundation, who sponsored this project, he recently finished implementing the necessary improvements to the BHND driver. And these changes in place allow us to finally be able to support the existing BWN Broadcom softMac Wi-Fi driver to the BHND bus. and implement initial support for the BCM 43224 and BCM 43225 chipsets, with additional hardware support to be forthcoming. Now that his efforts on FreeBSD Broadcom Wi-Fi support more progressed far enough to be generally useful, he wanted to take some time to provide a brief overview on Broadcom's Wi-Fi hardware and explain how his work provides a foundation for further FreeBSD Broadcom Wi-Fi system-on-chip improvements. So he provides a brief background on Broadcom Wi-Fi hardware and writes that Broadcom's Wi-Fi devices are members of the Broadcom Home Network divisions, or BHND, hence the name for the driver. And other BHND drivers include MIPS ARM system-on-chips, including Wi-Fi system-on-chips commonly found in consumer access points, as well as a large variety of related networking hardware. That's why Alan is so excited about this, because it supports a bunch of devices then that are in the market.
I think the Raspberry Pi and a bunch of related things are very popular in that regard.
Yeah. Certainly, and having support from FreeBSD for that is good to have. So the BHND devices utilize a common set of Broadcom IP cores or functional blocks connected via one or two on-chip bus architectures. The hardware designed prior to 2009 used Broadcom's SSB backplane architecture based on Sonic Silicon's interconnect IP. Subsequent hardware adopted by Broadcom's BCMA backplane based on ARM's AMBA IP. The IP cores used in earlier SSB-based devices were adapted for compatibility with the new backplane. And when BHND hardware is used in a PCI Wi-Fi card or an SDIO Wi-Fi module, which is typically found on the Raspberry Pis, the device's dual-mode peripheral controller is configured to operate as an endpoint device on the host's peripheral bus, bringing access to the system-on-chip hardware. So host access to system-on-chip address space is provided via a set of register windows, like a set of configurable windows into system-on-chip addresses mapped via PCI BARs. DMA support is done by the bridge core sparse memory of the host address space into the backplane address space. So you can see this is very hardware-centric. These address regions may be used as a target for the on-chip DMA engines. So any backplanes that interrupt vectors use are routed to the bridge core and are mapped by the bridge to the host interrupts. Like MSIX, for example. This is a typical example. The host is generally expected to provide drivers for the IP cores found on the system-on-chip backplane. Since these cores are found in both BHND system-on-chips and BHND Wi-Fi devices, it is advantageous to share driver and platform code between the two targets. So the modernization of FreeBSD's Broadcom software support is that FreeBSD has supported these adapters, but is now provided by two partially overlapping PCI/card bus drivers. The legacy Wi-Fi adapters are supported by the BWI. The driver remains in tree to support devices incompatible with version 4 or the later firmware, all of which were released prior to December 2002, so this is already 16 years ago. Modern Wi-Fi adapters are supported by BWN, with access to on-chip cores mediated by BHND. So prior to his work on porting BWN to BHND, access to on-chip cores was mediated by SIBA_BWN, a PCI Wi-Fi specific derivative of the legacy SIBA SSB bus driver. These were two major limitations to SIBA BWN that have long blocked adding support for the newer softMAC Wi-Fi chipsets. So the newer BCMA interconnect found in post-2009 hardware was not supported by SIBA, and SIBA BWN assumed a PCI-PCIe bridge, preventing its use on FreeBSD MIPS Broadcom system-on-chips with interconnected attached D11 cores. The new BHWN driver family, written as a replacement for SIBA and the SIBA BWN, provides the following: a unified bus driver interface for both SSB and BCMA on-chip interconnects, a generic BHND driver bridge driver framework, for host-connected BHND devices like the Wi-Fi adapters, and a PCI-PCIe bridge core driver for PCI-attached BHND devices. And an abstract BHND NVRAM API is also there, with support for the varied NVRAM formats bound to BHND Wi-Fi adapters and system-on-chips. Drivers for common BHND platform peripherals are also supported, like the UARTs or the SP-ROM, so that's a typical example here. And by porting a BWN to BHND, we are now able to support existing BCMA devices with MAC physical radio combinations readily supported by BWN, as was the case with the BCM and like the BCM chipsets. This opens the door to porting additional physical adapters supported to Broadcom's ISC licensed Linux drivers and will allow us to bring up BWN on Broadcom WI socks supported by FreeBSD/MIPS.
Interestingly, in the table they have here at the bottom, some of the newer Broadcom chips, like the BCM4360, are listed as supported on FreeBSD by the BHND driver and not yet supported on Linux by their B43 driver.
Oh yeah, there's a good comparison chart and table where you can see which kind of software version works already and is now better supported or supported in the first place. So this is pretty extensive. Wow, this is totally going into detail.
Yeah, and so there's also a little QA thing at the bottom where it asks about running, say, FreeBSD or pfSense on Broadcom's Wi-Fi access points. It says, we're close, but not quite there yet. The MIPS SoCs using a softcore chiplet will require a number of small improvements, including extending the NVRAM API to support querying device-specific properties. And then there's a list of some of the softMac SoCs and how the support for that is. Looks like most of the end stuff is there, but not the newer 5000 series chips.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thanks, Landon, for working on this. And of course, this was sponsored by the FreeBSD Foundation, and the donations that you do to the foundation are, in one way or the other, supporting projects like this.
Yep.
All right, now we have something for the graphics savvy folks, because we have...
There's no graphics.
Not yet? Well, but there could be. Come on, don't spoil it.
I guess... different definition of graphics is what we're not talking about graphics in that sense. Anyway,
yeah, true. But it's graphics.
A tutorial for monitoring OpenSMTPD, the OpenBSD native mail server, using Logstash and Grafana. And it says logs are useful, but graphs are sexy.
Yeah, that's what I'm
getting at. Here's a way to get a view of what happens with your mail server traffic using Web 2.0 tools, namely Logstash and Grafana. For those of you who are not aware of these tools, Logstash is some kind of log parser that can eat syslog formatted logs and write them into Elasticsearch in document format. Grafana is a web frontend that can dig into various databases and render graphics based on those requests. It doesn't go into the whole how to install those in particular tools. You can find other tutorials on that. It's fairly straightforward. But then you need to configure your OpenSMTPD to actually log into the system. So we have SMTPD, and it logs via syslog, and then syslog will be talking to Logstash, which will store it in Elasticsearch, and then Grafana will query Elasticsearch and draw graphs and make smiley faces. So in our syslog.conf, we configure it to send a copy of every log message via a TLS encrypted channel to Logstash. Then we configure Logstash to accept those messages, and you can see how it parses them and figures out what's what. And then once they're in Elasticsearch, you can then start looking at them and get fancy graphs.
Yeah, this is certainly nice.
And then once you go to Grafana, you get this. That's quite a dashboard.
That looks cool.
How many mails per day are going in and out. Nice bar charts and so on. Colors. Mm-hmm. Very fancy.
And it's very configurable. If you can also zoom in and, well, at least not in bar graphs, but you can hover over these and see exactly at which minute which mail happened and how much traffic came in and things like that. This is all provided by Grafana, and having this for your logs is very important if you just been hit by a spam bot or whatever, then you can see, oh, this is happening, and can react. It can also configure alerts in Grafana. This is not in the blog post, but it's providing a basic infrastructure for at least sending you emails if a certain threshold is reached in the graph, then you will get notified. So, time for the Beastie Wits this week, starting off with Charmbug presentation, which connects to one of the articles we covered earlier in this episode, writing FreeBSD malware. And this is basically a meetup for
Charmbug, which is a user group that meets in Maryland. Their next meeting will be at Onyx Point in Hanover, Maryland, Thursday, March 29th from 7:30 to 10:30. And there's a link there and a map and everything you need to find it.
Yeah, so if you're in the area, then check out that, because you might get contact with a bunch of BSD folks in your area you didn't know about, that they existed, that you're not the only one, and get to listen to an interesting talk. Next up, more meetups or more meetings. There is one in London in March. There's the London BSD meeting. So this is over on the FreeBSD mailing list for United
FreeBSD
Kingdom.
UK mailing list.
Oh, yeah. Oh, excellent. Yeah, this is by our friend Sevan, and he is continuing to host these kinds of events. So he writes quickly, being extra organized and calling the date for next month, Tuesday the 13th at 6:30 onwards, and provides the address for where this is a pub.
Yes,
seems like it.
The Hand and Shears, 1 Middle Street, Cloth Fair, London. Addresses in England are weird. Not as weird as in Japan, but weird.
Yeah, we'll see soon enough how these. But yeah, if you're in the London area, go to that meeting to meet some fellow BSD folks.
Actually, looking at the date of that meeting, Savan's not going to be there, I would assume, right?
And no, he's not going to Asia BSDCon.
What? He's not?
He canceled. He's going next year and polishing his talk until then a little bit better.
Okay.
It's the talk got canceled, and it's also mentioned in the agenda, which is unfortunate, but I can understand his reasons. But he will be back next year, or try for the next year, because just the NetBSD folks that are there are too interesting for him to not go there. So not this year, but next year. Okay. And I will heckler him until
there's a FreeBSD ports workshop in Poland at the Warsaw Hackerspace, February 24th. So that's this weekend at 5 o'clock. So if you're interested in getting involved in ports and you're in Warsaw, Poland, check it out. They have a list of ports they're suggesting people work on. If you don't know where to get started, you can pick one of the ones off this list and get worked on that. There's everything from small version updates to building ports for things that don't have ports yet. And there'll be people there to help you, and they'll try to make it as easy as possible. Great way to get started. You learn much faster when you do it in person, I think. So yeah, and if you're in Warsaw, check it out.
Yeah, if someone can help you look over your shoulder, then you can get much more progress than just trying it out for yourself.
Yeah, being able to ask someone a question in person and get an answer instantly is a lot faster than,
especially in your local language. You don't have to have the translation back and forth going on as well. All right. We have something also interesting in the next item. The history of NetBSD/Atari and support for Atari-compatible Milan OS C 2018 in Osaka. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
Osaka, yes. Yeah. It's part of Japan. At the Osaka SC, I'm some kind of systems conference or whatever, they have a talk about how NetBSD runs on it.
That's with a bunch of pictures and hardware.
Well, there's lots of Japanese writing, but I can't read that.
Oh, well, just look at the pictures. That
looks like a smiley face emoji.
Well, we can learn in a couple of days or next week.
Well, that clearly says PCI, and that's clearly NetBSD upgrading from NetBSD 3 to 4. So yeah.
Yeah, we need to go to Japan more often to learn the language or the
Well,
writing.
I'm leaving next week, so what else do you want?
Yeah, so check out
can't
that
go much
and get informed about that port.
Speaking of checking things out,
oh yeah,
well, most of us use SSH every day. We don't use SSH to its fullest potential. There are so many more things we could be doing and so many things we could be doing better. So you should check out SSH Mastery. The second edition of SSH Mastery is now out. You can go over to tiltedwindmillpress.com and get your copy for $9.99, or buy it wherever you like to buy your ebooks, whether that's Amazon or Gumroad or Barnes & Noble or whatever.
Your favorite book vendor. And if you scroll down a little bit further, there is a secret project from Michael Lucas called MWL Secret Book, which no one knows what it's all about, but you can sponsor this one if you're interested. So he's looking for print sponsors and ebook sponsors. So that might be a total scam, but it might also be a very popular book. And if you're interested in that, then sponsor those as well. Otherwise, wait until it's out, and we'll notify you and certainly mention it on the show, what it's all about.
Yep. But if you buy your SSH Mastery from tiltedwindmillpress.com, more of the money goes to the author. But
yeah,
whatever is easiest for you, buying it on Amazon and leaving a comment is great for the author as well. Yeah,
reviews are important for authors so that it shows other people that this book is good. And
so if you do buy the book and read it, please do leave a review somewhere. Or write it to us.
Yeah, we'll be happy to read it.
Well, I can tell you one thing. When Michael Lucas is writing a book, he backs it up. Because if he spent all that time writing a book and lost it, that would be a major financial hardship for him. So he uses Tarsnap.
Yeah,
so
and there's a bunch of new stuff.
Tarsnap.com/BSD Now and check it out. It's all prepaid, so you just put in some money and then use it. You can never get a surprise bill that way. And you can start as cheap as $5 a month.
Yeah. To back up your files securely into the cloud. Securely means for the real paranoid people who don't trust anyone with their data unless it's properly encrypted, and the encryption is happening locally on your local machine before it goes into any cloud areas. So anything that you need to back up, import config files, your tax reports, any kind of important documents or whatever data you have.
Your half-written book.
Drafts of your PhD thesis that you're writing, things like that. That needs to be securely backed up somewhere where no one can read it except you, because you're the only person holding the key. And this is exactly what the Tarsnap software is providing, or the Tarsnap service is giving you.
Yes. The reason you can tell it's really secure is if you lose the key, your data's gone. And that's on purpose, right?
Yeah.
It means that way someone else, a government or whatever, cannot force Cullen to give up your backup because it's encrypted and only you have the key. They have no way to recover your key. That's
exactly
by design. It's the only way it could really be secure.
Truly, yeah. And the important thing is that it's not just for the Unix folks. There are clients for the Linuxes, of course, the BSDs as well, but also for Mac OS and Windows. So there's no excuse anymore for not using Tarsnap.
Exactly. So don't delay. Do your backups today.
Yeah, before it's too late and disks die unexpectedly at the worst moment in time. And if you have a backup, you can rest easier than the people who didn't do a backup.
Exactly. So on to feedback and questions.
Yeah. So the first one is from Steven, and he has, like many other people, and people still do that, send us a viewer interview question, and this is short and sweet for the three of us doing this show. He'd like to ask the following question to us. Which video game have you played most over the last year, and what are your favorite things about it? If you do not play video games, what activities do you use to relax or play?
Okay, I guess I can start. What I've been playing the most over the last year would be Civilization 6 and the recent expansion to that. I've been playing Civ since I first saw it on a 486 at school and got a copy of it for home. Yeah, I've been an addict for that one since I was like 10 years old. So, I'm still playing it now. I just like the complexity of the play, I guess. It's interesting. And then for real-time strategy, I mostly been playing with Company of Heroes and some of the community-made mods for that. It just adds extra concepts to your typical real-time strategy type game by having concepts like cover and suppression and so on. I don't know. Don't play that many games. Try to spend my time on FreeBSD instead, but it's also one of the ways I socialize as well.
Yeah, it's a different kind of multi-user online massive multiplayer game.
Yeah. In particular, I very rarely play games by myself. Although Civ is one exception. I will play that by myself, although I prefer to play it with people.
Okay, so it's up to me now, I guess. So, like Alan, I pretty much left my gamer days way behind. Otherwise, I wouldn't have time for the things that I'm doing now. I pretty much had a hard time, quitting that before I started university. But I promised myself if I would continue playing these games, university and studying would not work out well. So I had to and sometimes way hard cut down the video gaming, but it worked out so far, and now I have a little bit more time sometimes, but it's been less and less. So last year I played a couple of times Magic the Gathering online, which is there's a client called xmage.de. It's basically a Java application that can, I'm not sure how legal this is, but it basically downloads the cards images from various sources, and then you can play with these cards. And that was pretty nice because it gives you a way to, and the rules are all implemented as far as the cards are available in that system. So you can also play with the newer cards without having to pay for the newer editions of Magic the Gathering.
My dad's playing some like epic old version I got for him like 10 years ago, and he's so
yeah.
Because when I was about 11 or so, I got into the actual card game, and my dad got into it as well. I gave it up a long time ago, but he still plays it constantly.
Yeah, I had to learn some of the newer rules that are there and what kind of new concepts there are.
Yeah,
some of these are
like second edition, and then even I guess even now, it was 7 years ago when I was working at the college. There were some students playing like whatever was newest then. I think like 11th edition or something, and I was like, all of that is very weird compared to what I did.
Yeah, I like the the fantasy aspects to it, and of course the card flavors and the artwork itself. That's really something that's great if you're into medieval stuff. For the more action-oriented stuff that I did last year, I kind of had a relapse into my XCOM days. So I played XCOM Enemy Unknown and the extension Enemy Within. That was super fun. But then I realized, I should have done a little bit more for the project, and then I started. It was nice to do, do a little bit of gaming here and there, but it depends. The question is, where do you spend your time? And right now, the interaction between the programmers or the developers on the FreeBSD or the community in general is much more interesting than the fun that a game could provide. Because I usually play through games and then I'm like, I achieved so many things now, like, killed all the bosses and all that, but now I don't have anything left. Once the game is over, then the game is over and you're left with nothing. You have to start over again. And in FreeBSD, you have kind of a track record and you can see, look, people, this is what I did there and here. So
it's like a real-life RPG.
Yeah. And that keeps me motivated and away from the addiction of video games.
I leveled up from users to docs to source to core.
Yeah, see, there's also some kind of leveling or advancement system.
Yes, and I've got these companions now, and I go to all these weird countries.
Well,
Anyway,
I mean, a game here and there doesn't hurt, but
Yeah.
the time is well spent in the FreeBSD project or other BSD projects.
So JT wrote in his answers. He says, for games, I generally stick to older RTS games like Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri. So that's actually spawned eventually out of Civilization. And Star Trek Armada 2. I think the newest game I play is Sins of the Solar Empire. So he's playing classic games. However, I generally don't play games because I feel so unproductive. So when I do, I like to relax by turning a wrench on my VW Corrado that I've been rebuilding from the ground up in my garage.
Ooh. That's a project.
Although he also has a thing for classic computers. He's got a garage full of very large, not modern machines.
So the mainframes of this world?
No, like just pre-Sandy Bridge giant servers. Like power hogs.
Oh, okay. But yeah, to each his own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thanks, Stephen, for sending your question. And if you have questions for us that we should cover in a future episode, maybe do another viewer interview segment, then send them to us at feedback@bsdnow.tv or any other feedback and questions for that. Okay, next up is PB with the title Trust Expanding Your 2080 Terabyte Pool. So this is definitely ZFS here. This one is for Alan, he writes. He wonders, when you are expanding your 280 terabyte Z pool, do you do it yourself or are you happy to partners staff it off to do? Personally, he has trouble letting anyone do this sort of stuff, especially with customer data.
I happen to have done that one myself. I would be comfortable with having someone else do it as well. The big thing is do it the first time with the -N flag, the no-op flag. So it won't actually do it. It'll just print out what the pool will look like afterwards. Look at that carefully, make sure it's right. If it is, take out the -N, and it works.
Yeah.
But yes, the other thing is, when I was expanding that pool, I already had a backup. Although it would have taken weeks to restore that backup.
Oh, yeah.
Because 280 terabytes of data is a lot of data. And it turns out, with that amount of data, a 1 gigabit link is a very small straw.
Yeah, in comparison, yeah. And I mean, the more important data you store there, the more careful you enter commands that make changes to the pool in any kind of way without, like Alan told you with the -N flag, just do a dry run first and then see how it looks like. But yeah, certainly my pools aren't that big yet, but it's certainly good to be able to expand those pools beyond the 280 terabytes or however big they are.
At the current rate, we're growing about 20 terabytes of data per month, which requires us to add 40 terabytes of storage because 2 copies. So yeah, we're adding storage a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, that seems that it's working fine and there's a demand for it. So yeah, and ZFS is future-proof in this regard. So why not use that? Mm-hmm. So yeah, we hope to answer that question. Next
in general, if somebody's read both, growing a pool, even just reading the first ZFS book is enough. If they understand the first ZFS book, then they should be safe to unleash on your array.
Sure, yeah. Or you can do it, you can try it out with a small array of USB sticks or test files.
You can create a Z pool out of files, so it's easy to experiment with.
Yeah, then you can see what happens before we go to the real hardware. All right. Next up is Tim with ZFS questions for the ZFS man. I guess that's you or me. Well, I just read it. These questions are for you, Alan. Specifically, his questions are about ZFS file system, LZ4 compression, and the LZ4 utility for compressing individual files. Is there any risk of data corruption saving a .lz4 file on a ZFS volume using LZ4 compression?
Nope. There's no interactions there or anything. The LZ4, when you make a file, is just different. And so it won't cause a problem. interesting property of LZ4, it might actually compress the LZ4 file more.
Yeah, that's what he asks as well.
Oh, okay. So normally, like, if you put a gzip or an xzip or something on there, it's probably not going to compress. Because of the way LZ4 works, and it's really biased towards speed, there's this thing called, I think, HC LZ4 or LZ4 HC, where it turns out if you LZ4 a log file, and then LZ4 that, and then LZ4 that, and LZ4 that, you can keep getting gains up to a certain point where eventually the gains are too small. So there's actually a tool you can download that does this and actually get better compression with LZ4. And there was some work 2 years ago, I think, at the OpenZFS Dev Summit of considering adding that to ZFS.
Okay. He also writes or asks, or does it make determinations about what will be compressed and what will not, based on metadata before the file is written to disk?
So currently in ZFS, no. What it does is when it calls the compressor, it says, here's some data, please compress it. It gives it an output buffer that is 12.5% smaller than the input buffer. If the compression can't make the data fit in the smaller buffer, the compression will fail. And ZFS will know, okay, I will store this uncompressed because the compression isn't going to be worth it. There is a feature in development called Smart Compress that actually does things like keeping track of individual files. And notice the first 20 megabytes of this file didn't compress. Probably don't need to bother trying to compress the next 128K of this file. So it can keep track on per file basis. This file has not been compressible so far. I'm going to skip wasting time trying to compress it. And then it retries one block every so often to find out if maybe it's changed. So that feature doesn't exist today, but there's somebody working on something like that from Nexenta, I think, to provide a bit more smarts about it. Although, in general, ZFS is perfectly safe. It might let you save a bit of CPU by skipping doing some of the work. Not that useful today because LZ4 is so fast, but as we add Z standard and maybe other compressors to ZFS, and you might decide to turn them up to a high level where it's going to use a lot of CPU, it might become more advantageous to have smarts like these to skip trying to compress things that maybe are not compressible.
Yeah, that's what he also writes. Could it compress a Z standard or Tar's GZ file even more, and that he understands?
Very unlikely that it's going to have any gains on an archive other than LZ4. Most archivers are already doing about as much as they're going to do. It's like, if you try to bzip a gzip, you're not going to get much.
Even it's down the rabbit hole.
if you take the same tar and you gzip it and xzip it, there'll be a big difference, or could be anyway. But if you take the gzip version and try to xzip it, the gains are not going to be the same.
Yeah, because the compression information also has to be stored somewhere to decompress it again, and that's also taking some space away. So he understands that the LZ4 utility supports 16 different levels of compression. I guess that's Z standard. By default, does ZFS use level 3, and can this be changed?
So currently it's hard-coded in the LZ4 implementation in ZFS, and it's hard-coded to compression level 12. But the levels are powers of 2, so...
I guess they tested that and figured out the right level.
The 12 in this case doesn't map to that existing...
scheme of levels like gzip.
But yeah, it's not like gzip, but it's a 16 levels. But in here, it specifically mentions a level 17, so maybe it's not quite the same. But they find that having the block size be something like the L1 cache makes sense, but the default in ZFS's version of LZ4 is 12, which is 16 kilobytes. Whereas 13 would be 32 kilobytes and 14 would be 64, etc.
Yep. And
I've been
lastly,
looking at actually making it support the range of levels so that you can choose, and seeing what that does as well.
his last question is, what compression algorithm does Scale Engine use for its production CDN servers, if you can mention that, and why did you choose that one?
So we use LZ4, and we barely use it. We mostly do video or already compressed content, like the ISO
codec
downloads, or like the package library for TrueOS is already TAR-XZ files, and all the video is already H.264. So there isn't much to be gained from compression. However, compression on the logs makes a huge difference for us. We get ridiculous compression ratios on logs, as you can imagine.
Oh yeah,
So yes,
definitely.
we're pretty much all stock FreeBSD releases currently, even. So we don't even have Z standard in production at Scale Engine yet. And even once it's available, we probably won't use it for much, just because we need the speed more for the log files than the savings aren't enough to make a difference to us. And for the video, no compression is going to help. So it's actually not that useful of a feature to Scale Engine specifically.
Yeah, I do some compression of our, big data sets. These are not ZFS data sets, but just sets of data that they use for some kind of analysis. And they had a 930 gigabyte JSON file. And I used the different levels of, compression and also the record size, punched it up to 1 megabyte. That kind of saved a bunch more space.
Yeah, and with Z standard as an option, it would probably do a bit more and probably be nice. Using gzip on ZFS is just so slow.
Yeah, by comparison, yeah.
Yeah, so Z standard will be somewhere between like 4 and 8 times faster to get the same level of compression as gzip, and offering higher levels as well. So
very nice.
you
I
probably
can't
won't
wait.
want the highest level in Z standard. Like on my test laptop, the highest level is about 4 megabytes per second per core, which is probably way too slow. But the lower levels are like 800 megabytes per second per core.
That's,
is a lot
with the
faster.
growing data.
Yeah, which
it's
is a
just
lot
the
faster than the
necessary
disk
thing.
can go.
Yeah.
And that's why once I get Z standard working, the feature I want to work on is adaptive compression, where you set the compression on a data set to auto, or Z standard dash auto, and it varies the level based on the disk's ability to keep up. So how much data is sitting in RAM waiting to go out to the disk or waiting to be compressed. And so we set the highest compression level that's not going to slow it down, basically. So if the system gets very busy and the compression is slowing things down, it'll lower the compression level until it relieves the pressure. And then once the system's not busy, it'll crank it up again. So if your system's not busy, it'll compress things a lot. But when it is busy, it'll compress it less.
Okay, so Tim, thanks. He closes with, he loves all the Judah broadcasting shows and keep up being awesome. Thank you, Tim. And last but not least is Daniel with a ZFS full backup question. He also has praise for us. He writes, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for this awesome show. I'm a fan since he found it since 1.5 years ago. Wow, already so long. Okay, so he has a question about ZFS send and receive and would be very happy if we could answer it. So he has 2 systems with FreeBSD installed on them using ZFS. He'd like to make a full backup from one PC to the other, and everything is working fine except that he has a slight problem with properties. So he's doing a full backup. He's sending ZRoot and every other dataset over to a dataset on the second PC. Once the send and receive is done, datasets from the first computer would be mounted on the second PC, and he wanted to set the can mount property to off once the datasets are received, but he couldn't find a way to tell ZFS receive to modify the can mount property to off upon receiving a dataset.
Right. So you can do the -U flag on receive, and it won't automatically mount them. But then at reboot or whatever, it would still have the problem, and you'd have to manually set the can mount property. So the ZFS native tools don't provide a way to modify the properties in that way. but most of the backup scripts do, like ZXfer or zREPL, both have support for changing the mount point or changing the CAN mount property, or I use ZXfer for our stuff. All of our backups have the read-only flag set, so they can't be modified.
That's why
or whatever.
backups
and it
are
keeps them
made
from
this
getting
way.
out of sync when we're doing incremental replication.
Yeah, you pretty much covered his question already. Is there any way to do ZFS send and receive and modify the CAN mount property on the fly? We did that. Or do you have any better idea for full backups? Yeah, like you mentioned, zREPL or ZXfer. These are...
Yeah, it'd be good if ZFS grew that ability, though. I'm just not sure what it would look like. Like, it would have to be kind of generic, but kind of not, and it gets weird.
Yeah, it has to have all the, a bunch more than just file system related stuff in it.
Actually, there is, I think, if you use, was it -D?
Yeah, DVU is a typical switch for ZFS send and receive.
Right.
For
If
the
you use
sending part.
-D, it'll use the full sent snapshot path without the first element, which is the pool name, to determine the name of the new snapshot.
Yep. And also don't
that's
forget
not
that
quite
we
what I
have
was looking
bookmarks
for.
now, which can resume an interrupted send.
Well, what bookmarks allow you to do is not keep the old snapshot on the source system. Right? If you want to do incremental replication from like last week to this week, normally you had to keep the last week's snapshot around, which meant it took up any space for any files you've modified in the last week. If you create a bookmark out of that snapshot, you can then delete the snapshot, gain the space, and the bookmark keeps track of where you were, and it can send all the new data as part of an incremental.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that pretty much is it's a good way to, and I mean, you started off right. You have two PCs with running FreeBSD and using ZFS for all the backup needs, and that's pretty much a good solution. You just have to, do the rest of the CAN mount stuff and do it in a regular interval.
If you read the ZFS man page, I think the -D flag might do what you want. It's mostly about recreating the directory hierarchy. I don't remember if it solves the problem with the mount points, though. I don't think so, because we're explicitly setting one of the mount points to /. It's not inheriting it, which is messing it up. But hopefully there'll be a better solution someday. But for now, the scripts do it nicely.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, people have been backing up pools like this for a couple of years on
actually,
OpenSolaris.
At the last BSD CAN, I helped Rod switch his two laptops. So we had two computers and laptops. One was a little bit better hardware than the other. And he's like, I want the system from this one to go over this one and the other one for that one. So I did it. And as a backup, he was left with, as a bonus, he was left with a backup of each laptop on the opposite laptop as well.
Well, see. That's the power of ZFS. Yeah, I guess, Daniel, you're getting there, and you can sleep a much better sleep than knowing that ZFS is taking care of your data. All right, that pretty much wraps up this show. We are also welcoming further questions, comments, show ideas, or future stories we should cover in the episodes that are to come. Send them to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and we'll cover it in a future episode. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.